The clock that knew when she'd die. Eleanor Whitaker had never noticed how loudly the bedroom clock ticked until the night it stopped. Not battery dead stopped, not broken gear stopped, but holding its breath stopped. The second hand frozen between 2:14 and 2:15 a.m. as if waiting for permission to move. She blinked at it through the fog of half-sleep, her fingers clutching the quilt as the silence thickened around her. The kind of silence that wasn't empty but crowded like the air itself had turned to velvet and pressed against her eardrums. Outside, the wind sighed through the oak tree, a branch scraping the window in a rhythm that almost sounded like fingernails. Tap, 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 the clock's gears gave a sudden, shuddering clunk the second hand lurching forward, but now it moved backward each tick slower than the last, the minute hand trembling as it inched toward 2:13. Lena's breath hitched. She'd owned this clock for 12 years. It had never done this before. The bedroom temperature dropped sharply, her exhales blooming white in the dark as the clock's face began to bulge the glass distorting like something was pushing through from the other side. A stain spread across the ceiling above her bed, not water, not mold, but a dark, viscous seep that smelled like wet pennies and birthday candles. The clock's ticking grew louder, each tock now syncopated with the drip of the stain onto her pillow. Plink, tock, plink, tock, Lena tried to scream, but her throat had sealed shut, her muscles locked in that heavy paralysis between sleep and waking. The last thing she saw before her eyes slid shut against her will was the clock's hands snapping to 3:17 a.m., a time that meant nothing to her yet. But it would. Why this works for boring horror for sleep, Slow, repetitive details, clock ticks, dripping, wind, induce calm before dread. Subtle wrongness, time moving backward, small stains, builds unease. Sleep paralysis vibe blurs reality for maximum creepiness. Want me to continue this new story? Or adjust the tone to be even sleepier? Chapter 2. The stains that grew when she wasn't looking. The morning light revealed nothing unusual about the clock. No backward hands, no bulging glass, just the same bland IKEA model she'd bought on sale years ago. But the stain on the ceiling remained, though it had dried into a faint brownish mark no bigger than a quarter. Lena poked at it with a broom handle, half expecting it to flake away like old paint. Instead, the plaster gave slightly under pressure, spongy and damp. She made a mental note to call the landlord about a possible leak as she shuffled to the kitchen, her bare feet sticking to linoleum that felt oddly tacky despite being freshly mopped yesterday. The coffee machine gurgled to life, its usual comforting sound undercut by a new, irregular clicking, like a fingernail tapping against glass inside the mechanism. She poured a cup anyway, the steam curling into shapes that for just a second resembled numbers, 3, 1, 7. The first sip tasted wrong. Not bitter, not sour, but thick, like she'd stirred in a spoonful of that ceiling stain instead of sugar. She spat it into the sink, watching the dark liquid swirl down the drain in slow, syrupy spirals that clung to the stainless steel long after they should have vanished. The fridge hummed louder than usual, the vibration making her teeth ache as she reached for the milk, only to freeze when she saw the expiration date. December 17, 2023. 3 days from now. Except she'd bought this carton yesterday, and the label clearly read, "Sell by March 14th, when she checked. Her reflection in the microwave door showed her holding the milk, her face pale but otherwise normal. But the reflection's eyes kept blinking a half second after hers did, its mouth twitching into a smile she wasn't making. The microwave's clock, which had been broken for months, suddenly flickered to life, its green digits burning 3:17 into her retinas before going dark again. The milk carton in her hand burst open at the seams, not spilling but oozing a substance too dark to be milk, too thick to be blood, crawling up her wrists in branching, vine-like patterns that disappeared the moment she gasped. The landlord's number went straight to voicemail when she called. The recording didn't play his usual greeting. Just 3 seconds of a music box melody. The same one she'd heard in a childhood nightmare she'd forgotten until this exact moment, before the line went dead. The ceiling stain above her kitchen table had doubled in size while her back was turned. Chapter 3. The whispers in the wallpaper. The ceiling stain had spread to the size of a dinner plate by noon, its edges creeping outward in fractal patterns that resembled veins or maybe roots, the center darkening to a glossy black that reflected Lena's face back at her with subtle distortions, her eyes slightly too far apart, her mouth a hair too wide, when she dared to look directly at it. She'd covered it with a towel tacked up with pushpins, but the fabric sagged unnaturally, as if something beneath it was pressing downward, and by 3 p.m. the towel itself had grown damp with the same coppery smelling fluid. The pushpins rusted over as though years had passed in hours. The landlord never called back. The handyman she found online cancelled last minute, his text reading only, "Sorry, can't fix what's not broken," with no punctuation, the letters oddly spaced like each word had been typed separately by different hands. The walls themselves seemed to breathe now, the vintage floral wallpaper she'd always hated pulsing faintly when she wasn't staring directly at it, the once tacky roses now blooming darker petals in the corners where the strips met, their centers deepening into voids that swallowed the afternoon light. She tried to distract herself by scrubbing the sticky linoleum, but the mop water turned murky after one pass, tiny black particles swirling in the bucket like drowned insects, and when she dumped it down the shower drain, the pipes groaned for 10 straight minutes afterward, a wet, guttural sound that formed something almost like words if she listened too closely. Exhaustion hit her like a truck at sunset, not the pleasant tiredness of a long day but the leaden, suffocating fatigue of illness, and she collapsed onto the couch without meaning to sleep, her dreams full of a child's voice counting backward from numbers that didn't exist, the counting punctuated by the sound of her own clock ticking relentlessly from somewhere deep inside the walls, its rhythm syncing up with her slowing heartbeat until she jolted awake at 3:17 a.m. to find the towel she'd hung now lying in a soaked heap on the floor, the stain above her having expanded to cover nearly the entire ceiling, its surface rippling gently like the skin of a soap bubble about to pop, the room smelling not of rust and rot anymore but of her grandmother's perfume, a scent Lena hadn't encountered since childhood funeral, the realization hitting her with icy clarity as the first drop landed warm on her cheek. The house wasn't haunted. It was remembering, and it wanted her to remember too. Chapter 4. The memory in the floorboards. The droplet slid down Lena's cheek with the slow viscosity of honey, carrying the cloying scent of funeral lilies and mothballed sweaters straight into her pores as the ceiling finished its transformation above her, no longer plaster but something translucent and throbbing, a stretched membrane through which dim shapes moved in lazy circles like fish under ice. The floorboards creaked beneath her bare feet in a new pattern, 3 quick steps from the hallway, 17 from the kitchen, the numbers repeating in perfect sync with the pulse now visible beneath the stained surface. Her reflection in the blackened bedroom window showed her still sitting on the couch, head tilted up in horror, while her actual body stood frozen in the center of the room, torn between 2 realities. The perfume smell intensified, conjuring the scratch of wool stockings and the squeak of hospital shoes on linoleum, memories that weren't hers. A child's laughter bubbled up through the floor vents, followed by the unmistakable sound of a music box playing just slightly out of tune, the melody warping as it climbed the stairs note by note, each step producing a different instrument, a violin's whine on the 3rd, a dentist's drill on the 7th, a dying man's rattle on the 17th. The fridge door swung open down the hall, its contents rearranged to display a single item on each shelf, a jar of teeth on the top, a glass casserole dish holding what looked like a human tongue pressed flat as deli meat, and on the bottom shelf, the milk carton from yesterday, now bulging with dark fluid, its expiration date changed again to today's date. The ceiling membrane split with a sound like Velcro tearing, releasing not liquid but whispers that swarmed her face like gnats, their words indistinct but their meaning clear, they were apologies. The clock in the bedroom chimed 4 times, though the hands still read 3:17, and Lena finally understood why the house felt familiar. She'd lived here before, not in this lifetime, but in whatever came after. Chapter 5. The reckoning in the walls. The whispers solidified into cold, slender fingers that traced Lena's jawline with surgical precision as the ceiling membrane split wider, revealing not an attic but a vast, dark space where the laws of physics had been peeled back like old wallpaper, a place where the walls were made of compressed memories and the air smelled like burnt hair and forgotten birthdays, the child's laughter now coming from all directions at once, the music box melody twisting into a dissonant symphony of every bad moment Lena had ever suppressed, the time she'd found a dead bird in her lunchbox at school, the way her first love had whispered someone else's name in his sleep, the night her father had disappeared and never come home, each memory given physical form as rusted nails materialized in the floorboards, their sharp points glistening with something that wasn't quite blood but carried the same metallic tang, the fridge door slamming shut with enough force to make the entire house shudder, the contents inside now audibly sloshing as though the organs had liquefied, the milk cartons seemed splitting further to release thin tendrils of black fluid that snaked across the linoleum in deliberate patterns, spelling out words Lena couldn't read but understood in her marrow. Asterisk, you promised you'd stay this time, asterisk. The clock's hands finally breaking free of their frozen state to spin wildly, each rotation accompanied by a wet crunch from inside the walls like bones being ground into paste, the stained ceiling now sagging so low Lena could see her own face reflected in its quivering surface, except the reflection was younger, happier, with eyes that hadn't yet learned how to look over their shoulder in dark parking lots, a version of herself that had never left this house, that had been waiting here all along in the spaces between seconds, the music box's melody reaching a crescendo as the floorboards beneath her feet disintegrated into a fine black powder that smelled of burnt sugar and hospital antiseptic, the walls peeling back like stage curtains to reveal the truth she'd been running from, not a ghost, not a curse, but a choice she'd made decades ago in another life, a deal sealed with a whisper and a handshake she could now feel burning in her palm like a fresh brand, the child's laughter resolving into a voice so familiar it made her teeth ache, her own, but younger, softer, saying the words that had started it all. I'll stay if you let me forget. Asterisk, the house exhaled around her, the tension snapping like a rubber band stretched too far, and as the first rays of dawn filtered through the now pristine windows, Lena found herself standing in a spotless kitchen, the ceiling smooth and white, the clock ticking normally on the wall, the fridge stocked with ordinary groceries, the only evidence anything had happened being the faint silver scar circling her wrist like a bracelet made of old promises, and the music box sitting on her kitchen table, its lid slightly ajar, the first few notes of a lullaby spilling out as the hands of the clock jumped to 3:17 one final time before the world reset itself. Chapter 6. The Unraveling of Time. Asterisk, the music box played its lullaby with a mechanical sweetness that made Lena's teeth vibrate, the melody threading through the suddenly too clean air of the kitchen like a needle pulling invisible stitches through reality itself. One moment she was staring at the delicate porcelain ballerina frozen mid-twirl inside the box, the next she was 8 years old again, standing in her grandmother's attic where dust motes swam in slanting afternoon light, her small hands brushing against that same music box tucked between yellowed National Geographics and moth-eaten fur coats, the memory so vivid she could smell the cedar chest and feel the static cling of the pink polyester dress she'd hated but worn every Sunday, except now she saw what childhood Lena hadn't, the way the shadows in the attic corner pulled too thickly, how the ballerina's painted smile didn't quite reach her eyes, the barely perceptible whisper from inside the box saying open me, open me, open me, asterisk, in a voice that mimicked her grandmother's but carried something oily beneath the words. The present crashed back with the sound of shattering china as the kitchen window exploded inward, not from any external force but because the glass simply decided to stop being solid, thousands of shards hovering mid-air like a paused rainstorm before reversing trajectory to embed themselves in the walls with soft thuds, the holes they left behind oozing that same black syrup from the ceiling stain that no longer existed, or maybe had never existed, Lena's silver bracelet scar burning white hot as the music box lid snapped shut with enough force to make the table legs tremble, the sudden silence more oppressive than any scream. Her reflection in the microwave door was wrong again, this time showing her face melting like wax, features sliding downward to form new arrangements, sometimes her mother's downturned mouth, Sometimes the sharp cheekbones of a woman she didn't recognize but knew instinctively was another version of herself from a timeline where she'd made different choices, the fridge humming louder to cover the wet squelching sounds coming from inside its walls, the once white surface now mottled with fingerprints that weren't hers, small ones, child-sized, appearing faster than she could wipe them away. The music box wound itself with a series of clicks that matched exactly the rhythm of Lena's accelerating heartbeat, the ballerina now visible through the closed lid as if the wood had turned to smoke, her delicate arms outstretched not in dance but in supplication, the tiny face tilted up in terror towards something looming above her that Lena couldn't quite see but could feel in the sudden pressure change that made her eardrums pop, the scent of funeral lilies so thick now it coated her tongue, the walls exhaling a warm breath that carried whispers in languages she'd never learned but understood perfectly. Asterisk, you broke the agreement, asterisk, and time to pay, asterisk, and we warn you, we warned you, we warned you, asterisk, the floorboards softening beneath her feet like overripe fruit, her socks growing damp as something beneath the house began to rise, the music box's mechanism speeding up to a fever pitch as the clock's hands spun faster and faster, each rotation stripping another layer from the world until only the bones remained, the support beams like ribs, the wiring like veins, the windows like empty eye sockets, and Lena finally saw what had been chasing her through all those half-remembered dreams, not a monster, not a ghost, but a vast and hungry absence wearing the shape of her own future, its outstretched arms identical to the ballerina's pose, its hollow eyes reflecting infinite versions of Lena, all making the same fatal mistake, believing they could outrun a debt etched into their bloodline before they'd even been born. The last thing she heard before the darkness took her was the music box winding down with a contented sigh, and a child's voice, her own, but not, whispering asterisk, again, asterisk as the world stuttered and reset. Chapter 7, The Eternal Return asterisk. The world reassembled itself in jagged pieces, first the smell of fresh coffee and toast that Lena hadn't made, then the two bright morning lights slicing through curtains she didn't remember opening, finally the crushing normalcy of her own bedroom looking exactly as it had before the ceiling stain, before the clock's betrayal, before the music box's hungry melody had unraveled the seams of her reality. She sat up too fast, her head swimming with residual dread that had no place in this sunlit scene, her fingers flying to her wrist where the silver scar should have been, only to find unmarked skin. The clock on her nightstand ticked obediently, its hands fixed to a benign 7:18 a.m., no bulging glass, no backward counting seconds. For one fragile moment, Lena allowed herself to believe it had all been a nightmare, until she turned her head and saw the music box sitting primly on her dresser, lid closed, a thin layer of dust coating its surface as if it had been there for years. The ballerina's face was just visible through the fogged glass panel on the lid, her painted eyes now clearly looking directly at Lena, the porcelain lips parted in what might have been a scream or the beginning of a whisper. The air smelled faintly of funeral lilies beneath the coffee aroma, a scent that grew stronger when Lena approached the dresser, her reflection in the mirror above it lagging a half-second behind her movements, its expression frozen in wide-eyed terror regardless of what Lena's own face did. The first note of the lullaby started when her fingertips brushed the music box's lid, not from inside the box, but from the walls themselves, the house humming the melody through its pipes and beams, the vibrations making Lena's back teeth ache as the ceiling above her began to darken at the edges like old parchment held too close to a flame. Downstairs, the fridge door creaked open on its own, the familiar sloshing sound returning with renewed hunger, the floorboards groaning under the weight of something that hadn't been there a moment ago. The clock's hands began their familiar, frantic spin as Lena's vision doubled. She was both here in this dissolving present and back in her grandmother's attic as a child, small hands reaching for the music box while the shadows coiled around her ankles like affectionate cats, both moments happening simultaneously across the gulf of years, the choice repeating itself. In an endless loop she suddenly understood she'd been trapped in for longer than just this lifetime. The music box lid clicked open with no hand touching it, revealing not the ballerina but a tiny, perfect replica of Lena's own face molded in porcelain, its mouth moving in sync with the whisper now coming from every surface of the house, "You never wake up. You only ever forget." Asterisk. The walls breathed in, The ceiling stain bloomed anew, and somewhere deep in the foundation of the house, something ancient and patient began counting down from 317. Chapter 8. The Whispering Foundation *. The counting reverberated through the floorboards like a slow beating heart, each number dragging Lena deeper into a realization that curled around her spine. She had been here before, not just in this house but in this exact moment, the music box's porcelain doppelganger mouthing words her ears refused to process, the ceiling stain spreading in the same fractal pattern as the veins beneath her own skin when she pressed too hard against her wrist. The fridge downstairs gave a wet, guttural cough, followed by the sound of something heavy being dragged across the linoleum, something that left a trail of thick, glistening fluid in its wake, the smell of spoiled milk and funeral flowers now so dense it coated Lena's tongue like paste. The clock's hands spun faster, their ticking syncing with the countdown vibrating through the walls, the numbers no longer abstract but carved into her bones in some long-forgotten language her body remembered even if her mind didn't. The music box's replica of her face had begun to cry, tiny porcelain tears tracking down its cheeks and pooling at the base of the box where they hardened into jagged little pearls that rattled like teeth when the house exhaled. The mirror above the dresser had gone entirely black, its surface rippling like a pool of ink disturbed by some unseen disturbance, and then, with a sound like 1,000 pages turning at once, it showed her not a reflection but a memory, Lena at 5 years old, standing in a hospital hallway she didn't remember visiting, her small hand clutching a doctor's coat as they walked toward a room numbered 317, the scent of antiseptic and something underneath it, something spoiled and sweet, the same smell that now clung to her clothes, her hair, the inside of her nostrils. The child in the memory turned to look at her, not through the mirror but through time itself, her eyes hollow with a knowledge no 5-year-old should possess, her lips forming silent words that the present-day Lena felt rather than heard. You let them put it in me. The music box's lullaby swelled to a deafening roar, the ceiling splitting open with a sound like 1,000 bones breaking in perfect sequence, the blackened stain now dripping not liquid but whispers, dozens, hundreds of them, all in voices Lena recognized from every stage of her life, all saying the same phrase in unison. You signed the contract in blood you didn't know you had. The floor beneath her feet softened like rotting fruit, her socks soaking through with something warm and metallic as the house's true shape revealed itself in flashes. The walls were not wood and plaster but layers of compressed time, the insulation was made of forgotten memories, the foundation stones were etched with names she didn't know but would answer to if called. The music box's lid snapped shut with a finality that shook the room, the porcelain Lena inside still screaming silently as the ceiling opened like a great eye, its pupil dilating to reveal not an attic but a vast, endless corridor lined with doors, each marked with a different version of her name and a date that hadn't happened yet, the countdown in the walls reaching a fever pitch as the first door, the one marked with today's date, creaked open to reveal a darkness so complete it made the hallway seem bright by comparison. The last thing Lena saw before the darkness took her was her own hand reaching out, not in fear but in welcome, the silver scar reappearing on her wrist as if it had never left, the house's whispers coalescing into a single sentence that slithered into her ear like a living thing, welcome home. And then, silence. And then, the music box winding itself back up. And then, the clock's hands settling on 3:17 as the world reset itself once more. Chapter 9. The contract in her bones. The darkness behind door 317 wasn't empty. It was waiting. A patient, pulsing mass of forgotten time that smelled like the inside of a childhood lunchbox left to rot in a school locker all summer, the air so thick with the promise of revelation that Lena's ears popped as she crossed the threshold, her silver-scarred wrist burning with the same intensity as the day she'd first gotten it, though she couldn't remember when that had been anymore. The floor here wasn't wood or tile but something organic and yielding, like walking across the tongue of some enormous beast, the walls glistening with the moisture that reflected the light from a source she couldn't identify, not a bulb or flame but something older, something that hummed the same frequency as the music box's twisted lullaby. Door after door stretched into the impossible distance, each labeled with variations of her name, Lena Marie Whitaker 1994, Eleanor Whitaker 1987, Helena Margaret Vaughan 2006, the dates skipping backward and forward through centuries, the surnames shifting like sand through an hourglass, but all the middle names staying eerily consistent, all the faces in the small photo frames beside each door unmistakably hers * despite the different features, different eras, different lives. The whispers here had shape and weight, brushing against her cheeks like moth wings as they carried phrases in languages dead and unborn. You always take the box, *, the foundation must be fed, *, 3rd floor, room 17. The music box sat on a pedestal at the hallway's first bend, its lid now gaping wide to reveal not a ballerina or porcelain face but a swirling void that matched the ceiling stain from her kitchen, its edges rippling with half-formed images. Lena at 8 signing her name in crayon on a contract written on what looked like human skin. Lena at 17 weeping as she buried the music box in a shallow grave that somehow ended up back in her grandmother's attic. Lena at 34, an age she hadn't yet reached, standing in a hospital room watching a doctor press the now familiar box into the hands of a small, dark-haired child who looked up at her with accusing eyes and said *, "Why did you give it to me?" * in a voice that wasn't a child's at all but something far older. The scar on her wrist split open without pain, the silver thread she'd torn free in another life, or was it this one? Slithering out like a living thing to connect her to the music box's void, the moment of contact sending a jolt through her body that tasted like pennies and birthday cake, the hallway doors slamming shut in perfect sequence like dominoes falling, the whispers rising to a deafening crescendo as the truth unfolded inside her skull like a poisonous flower. The music box wasn't a curse. It was a relay, a baton passed generation to generation in an endless race against something crouching in the basement of reality, something that fed on time itself, and the Whitaker women, the Whitakers, the Vaughans, all of them her * had been its caretakers since the first Lena signed her name in something darker than blood. The current Lena, the one standing in the hallway with the silver thread connecting her to the void, had broken the cycle by refusing to pass it on, and now the house was starving. The walls around her pulsed hungrily, the floor softening further as the thing in the foundation began to wake, its breath rattling the doors in their frames, its voice, when it finally spoke, not a sound but an absence that carved itself directly into her neurons, "Feed me or become me." The music box's void yawned wider, the silver thread pulling taut as the first door, the one marked with her birth name and date, creaked open to reveal a darkness that moved like liquid, that smelled like her grandmother's perfume, that reached for her with hands she instinctively knew had once been human. The last coherent thought Lena had before the thread dragged her forward was that she finally understood why the clock always stopped at 3:17. It wasn't a time. It was a room number. And she'd been living in it her whole life. Chapter 10, The Feast of Forgotten Names *. The liquid dark swallowed Lena whole with a sound like 1,000 pages being torn from a book simultaneously. The silver thread around her wrist now a glowing tether connecting her to nothing and everything at once as she tumbled through memories that weren't hers, birthdays in houses she'd never lived in, funerals for people she'd never met, all starring different versions of herself with the same tired eyes holding the same cursed music box. The darkness tasted like the inside of an old freezer where meat had spoiled decades ago, clinging to her tongue as the whispers solidified into hands that gripped her ankles, her wrists, the base of her skull, dragging her deeper into the foundation's gullet where the air thickened into syrup and the walls pulsed with a rhythm that matched the erratic beat of her heart. The music box floated beside her, its open lid revealing not a void anymore but a miniature stage where porcelain figures acted out her family's history, a Victorian Lena stitching her own lips shut with silver thread, a Depression-era Lena burying the box in a coffin with a child's corpse, a future Lena with hollow cheeks and milky eyes standing over a hospital crib holding something that wasn't a baby, each scene illuminated by the cold light of her scar as the house feasted on her terror, digesting it into fuel to keep the walls standing. The clocks ticking, the cycle repeating. The hands pulling her apart grew more insistent, their touch leaving bruises that bloomed like ink in water, spreading across her skin in patterns that matched the ceiling stain's fractal veins, her screams absorbed by the darkness before they could leave her throat. The silver thread suddenly yanked taut, reeling her toward the music box's stage where the current performance showed her own mother, not as Lena remembered her but younger, frightened, standing in this same darkness holding the box out to a shadowy figure with too many teeth and not enough eyes, her voice cracking as she whispered asterisk, take her instead, asterisk, and pointed to a bassinet where baby Lena slept unaware. The revelation hit like a fist to the sternum, all breath leaving her body at once as the whispers crescendoed into a single sentence that wasn't a whisper at all but her own voice echoing across generations. You always choose yourself in the end. Asterisk, the music box's mechanism gave a final, shuddering click as the stage reset, the porcelain figures rearranging themselves for the next act, this one showing Lena as an old woman handing the box to a dark-haired child who looked up with her own eyes and said asterisk, Grandma, what is this? Asterisk, in a voice thick with impending doom. The darkness convulsed around her, the hands retreating as the house made its offer in the form of a memory, not a vision but her asterisk memory, the one she'd buried so deep even the foundation hadn't been able to dig it up until now. 6-year-old Lena hiding in her grandmother's closet, the music box clutched to her chest as something scratched at the door, her small fingers prying open the lid just enough to see the tiny porcelain figure inside wasn't a ballerina but a crouching thing with its hands over its eyes, its mouth stretched in a silent scream that matched her own as she whispered asterisk, take someone else, asterisk, and shoved the box toward the closet door just as it began to open. The memory dissolved into the present darkness, the taste of spoiled milk flooding her mouth as the house waited for her decision, pass the curse along as every Lena before her had done, or let the foundation consume her completely and break the cycle. The music box began to play again, its lullaby slower now, mournful, the porcelain figures frozen mid-motion as the silver thread around Lena's wrist loosened its grip, coiling in the air between her and the box like a question mark. Outside the darkness, in a world that might not exist anymore, a clock struck 3:17. Somewhere, a ceiling stain spread. Somewhere, a fridge door creaked open. Somewhere, a child who wasn't hers, asterisk not yet asterisk, woke screaming from a dream they wouldn't remember by morning. Lena reached for the music box. The house held its breath, and in the space between one heartbeat and the next, the choice was made. Chapter 11. The choice that was never a choice asterisk. Lena's fingers closed around the music box just as the darkness convulsed with something like hunger or anticipation or maybe even fear. The porcelain suddenly warm and pulsing against her palm like a living heart as the silver thread slithered up her arm to wrap around her throat in a loose noose that tightened when she exhaled, the whispers now forming words directly against her eardrums, asterisk, you know what comes next asterisk, and she did, with a certainty that bypassed thought and settled deep in her marrow like radiation. The box's lid snapped shut on its own, severing the miniature stage and its terrible plays, the sudden silence more oppressive than any scream as the darkness around her began to solidify into shapes, a hospital bed here, a child's rocking horse there, a doorway that led nowhere but pulsed with the same rhythm as the ceiling stain, all of it smelling like wet earth and burned hair and the particular must of her grandmother's attic where this had started and ended and started again more times than she could count. Her reflection appeared in every surface now, the polished wood of the rocking horse, the chrome bed rails, the glass face of a clock that hadn't been there a second ago, each version showing a different Lena at a different point in the cycle, their mouths moving in unison as they whispered asterisk, 3rd floor, room 17, asterisk over and over until the words lost meaning and became just sounds, just noise, just another layer in the foundation's endless hunger. The music box grew heavier in her hands, its weight increasing with each passing second until her arms trembled with the effort of holding it, the porcelain now leaching heat from her skin and leaving behind patches of numbness that spread like frost across a window pane. The silver thread around her throat pulsed once, twice, then dissolved into a fine mist that settled over her skin like a second layer, sinking in through her pores with a sensation like static electricity as the first true memory surfaced, not hers, not her mother's, but the original Lena's, the one who had built the house around the hunger instead of the other way around, the one who had trapped something in the foundation and fed it generations of daughters to keep it sleeping. The knowledge arrived fully formed, without language. The music box wasn't a relay or a curse but a lock asterisk, and every time Eleanor chose to pass it on instead of swallowing the key, the house grew another room, the foundation dug another layer deeper, the hunger woke another fraction more. The current Lena, the one holding the box with arms gone leaden, with frost creeping up her veins, understood with sudden, vicious clarity that there had never been a choice at all, only the illusion of one to make the feeding sweeter. The darkness around her shuddered, the hospital bed dissolving into mist as the child's rocking horse began to move on its own, its wooden joints creaking in time to the music box's lullaby which had started up again though no one had wound it, the sound warping and twisting as the porcelain grew teeth around its edges, tiny needle-sharp points that bit into Lena's palms hard enough to draw blood that wasn't red but black and thick as motor oil, the drops hitting the floor with a sound like coins dropping into a wishing well. The whispers rose to a crescendo, the reflections stepped closer, the silver thread reformed inside her chest to wrap around her lungs and squeeze, not to kill but to remind, to show her what came next if she kept fighting, if she refused to play her part, visions of the house collapsing in on itself, of the foundation cracking open to release what slept beneath, of countless versions of herself blinking out of existence as time itself unraveled without the hunger's careful maintenance. The music box's lid creaked open just a fraction, just enough to show the void inside had changed, no longer empty but filled with swirling silver threads, each one tied to a different Lena across different lifetimes, all converging on a single point deep in the foundation where something old and patient and hungry asterisk waited for its next meal. The last thing Lena saw before the darkness took her was the clock's hands snapping to 3:17 one final time, the numbers burning themselves into her retinas like a brand as the house exhaled around her and the cycle began anew. Chapter 12. The Eternal Return of Lena W. The moment the clock's hands locked onto 3:17, the world stuttered, Lena's body unraveling into silver threads that spiraled outward through time and memory, stitching themselves into the fabric of the house's foundation where the hunger waited with open jaws, its teeth made from the splintered remains of every music box that had ever been, its breath smelling of funeral lilies and the inside of childhood lunchboxes left to rot. She was everywhere at once, the Victorian Lena stitching her lips shut with shaking hands, the Depression-era Lena lowering a tiny casket into wet earth, the future Lena standing over a hospital crib with the music box clutched tight, all these versions of herself turning to look as the present Lena's consciousness fractured across them, the weight of centuries pressing down until her bones creaked like old floorboards. The house fed eagerly, its walls pulsing with renewed vigor as it digested her resistance, her terror, her final realization that there had never been an escape, only the brief illusion of one to make the meal sweeter. Downstairs, the fridge door swung open to reveal shelves now stocked with familiar items, a jar of teeth labeled, Lena 1994, a casserole dish holding a tongue marked, Lena 1987, the ever-present milk carton bulging with dark fluid, while the ceiling stain spread joyful fractal patterns across fresh plaster, its edges vibrating with satiated pleasure. In the attic, the music box sat pristine on a dusty trunk, its lid closed tight, its ballerina frozen mid-twirl with a smile that hadn't been there before. Outside, the oak tree scraped its branches against the window in a rhythm that almost sounded like fingernails. Tap, 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 asterisk somewhere, a clock began counting down from 317. Somewhere, a child who wasn't hers, asterisk not yet asterisk, stirred in their sleep. And deep in the foundation, something old and patient and eternally hungry settled back into dreams of its next meal, its whispered asterisk, again, asterisk vibrating through the pipes, the wires, the very bones of the house as the world reset itself once more. The front door creaked open, not from wind or intruder but in welcome, as a new moving van pulled up to the curb, its back doors swinging wide to reveal familiar furniture being carried by movers whose faces blurred when looked at directly. A woman stepped out of the van, her dark hair streaked with gray, her eyes tired but bright with the excitement of a fresh start. She didn't notice how the upstairs window reflected not her current form but a younger version of herself holding a music box. She didn't hear the whisper of asterisk, welcome home, Lena, asterisk as she crossed the threshold. And she certainly didn't feel the silver thread stitching itself into her wrist as she admired the sunlight streaming through the spotless ceiling onto the pristine hardwood floors that hadn't yet learned how to creak in warning, how to soften beneath certain footsteps, how to open up and swallow screams when the time came. Upstairs, in what would become her bedroom, the clock on the nightstand ticked obediently toward 3:17. The music box waited patiently in the attic. And the house was hungry again. Chapter 13. The new tenant asterisk. The moving van's taillights disappeared around the corner as the latest Eleanor Whitaker, this one going by Eleanor, since college but still answering reflexively to her birth name, stepped back into the foyer of what the realtor had called a charming Victorian with original details, her fingers brushing against the wallpaper that felt suspiciously warm beneath her touch, like skin flushed with fever. The house smelled of fresh paint and lemon polish with just the faintest undercurrent of something else, something that made the back of her tongue tingle, not quite mildew, not quite decay, but the particular must of old books left in damp basements, the scent tugging at a memory she couldn't quite place. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked with the particular pitch of someone shifting weight from foot to foot, though the movers had left and Eleanor knew she was alone. The ceiling lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized as she climbed the stairs to what would be her bedroom, her hand lingering on the banister where the wood grain formed patterns that looked almost like faces if she stared too long. The bedroom door stood slightly ajar despite her having closed it firmly after the movers left, the space beyond washed in late afternoon sunlight that should have felt welcoming but instead gave everything a faintly overexposed quality, like a photograph left to bleach in the sun. The clock on the nightstand, an antique she didn't remember owning, read 3:16, its second hand motionless between ticks as if hesitating to continue. A faint melody drifted through the slightly open closet door, a lullaby played on some distant music box that shouldn't have been there, the tune just familiar enough to raise the hairs on Eleanor's arms as she reached for the closet knob. Her reflection in the dresser mirror showed her still standing by the bed, hand outstretched but not quite touching the closet door, her face frozen in an expression of dawning horror that the real Eleanor didn't yet feel. The silver bracelet she'd worn since childhood, the one with the odd, unreadable inscription, suddenly grew tight around her wrist, the metal warming to an uncomfortable degree as the closet door creaked open another inch on its own, releasing a puff of air that smelled unmistakably of funeral lilies and the inside of her grandmother's attic. Somewhere deep in the house, something that had been sleeping for years stretched and yawned and began the slow process of waking up. The clock's second hand finally clicked forward. 3:17. The music box's lullaby grew louder, and Eleanor, who had never believed in ghosts or curses or things that went bump in the night, took her first step toward the closet, her reflection in the mirror lagging just a fraction of a second behind, its eyes widening in silent warning as the real Eleanor's fingers closed around the doorknob. The house held its breath. The foundation stirred, and deep in the attic, beneath a layer of dust that hadn't been disturbed in years, the music box's lid creaked open just enough for the porcelain figure inside to press its tiny hands against the glass and smile. Chapter 14. The awakening asterisk. Eleanor's fingers had barely grazed the closet doorknob when the silver bracelet on her wrist constricted like a living thing, the unreadable inscription suddenly glowing faintly as the wood beneath her palm pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm that matched nothing human. The closet door swung open the rest of the way with a groan that resonated in her back teeth, revealing not the expected shelves of sweaters and shoes but a long hallway stretching far beyond the house's physical dimensions, walls papered in the same floral pattern as her bedroom but darkened with age and something else, something sticky that caught the light in oily rainbows where her fingertips brushed against it. The music box's lullaby swelled to fill the space, no longer distant but emanating from somewhere just around the first bend, the melody warping as it bounced off surfaces that shouldn't have existed in her closet. The air smelled thicker here, clogged with the scent of wet earth and spoiled milk and that same indefinable must that had clung to her grandmother's attic, a smell that now triggered a visceral memory of being 8 years old and locked in that same attic darkness, her small hands pressed against something cold and porcelain while whispers slithered through the vents. Her reflection in the hallway's many mirrors, positioned at odd intervals between doors marked with dates that hadn't happened yet, showed subtle variations of Eleanor, one with hollow cheeks and silver-streaked hair, another with her mother's downturned mouth, a third whose eyes were entirely black and leaking a thick, tar-like substance that dripped onto the floorboards with a sound like pennies dropping into a well. The bracelet burned hotter, its inscription now clearly visible in the gloom, asterisk 3rd floor, room 17 asterisk, as the first door on the left creaked open to reveal a hospital bed where a woman who looked exactly like Eleanor lay hooked to machines, her wrists bound with silver thread that trailed off the mattress and into the shadows beneath the bed where something rustled eagerly. The music box's tune skipped a beat, then resumed at double speed as all the hallway doors began to open in sequence, each revealing a different nightmare, Eleanor burying a small casket in rain-soaked earth, Eleanor signing papers in a doctor's office while a shadowy figure placed a familiar box on the desk, Eleanor standing over a crib holding not a baby but the music box itself, its lid gaping wide as she lowered it toward the infant inside, the visions coming faster until they blurred together into a strobe light horror show that burned itself into her retinas. The floor tilted suddenly, the hallway elongating as the walls stretched upward into impossible heights, the ceiling splitting open like overripe fruit to reveal a pulsing, veined membrane through which distant shapes moved, not rats or insects but something with too many joints, its limbs bending in ways that made Eleanor's stomach lurch as it scuttled closer to the thinning barrier. The bracelet had fused to her skin now, the silver threads worming their way into her veins with a pain so exquisite it bordered on pleasure, her bloodstream lighting up with memories that weren't hers, birthdays where the cake candles burned black, funerals where the corpses sat up in their caskets and smiled, endless nights spent listening to the clock tick toward 3:17 while something scratched at the door with claws that sounded suspiciously like fingernails. The music box came into view at last, sitting primly on a pedestal at the hallway's end, its lid wide open to show the porcelain figure inside wasn't a ballerina but a perfect miniature of Eleanor as a child, its tiny hands pressed against the glass in a mirror of her own childhood memory, its painted lips mouthing the same words the real Eleanor had screamed in that attic long ago, "Let me out." Asterisk the ceiling membrane split with a wet tear, the thing behind it dropping into the hallway with a thud that shook the floorboards as the music box's mechanism wound itself up again, the first notes of its lullaby now clearly a countdown, the bracelet's threads spreading through Eleanor's body like roots as she realized, with the calm certainty of a death row inmate hearing the trapdoor release, that she'd been here before, would be here again, had always been here in some form or another, and the only way out was through the music box's gaping mouth. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was the clock on her nightstand, its hands frozen at 3:17 as the house exhaled around her and began the slow process of digestion. Somewhere, a new moving van pulled up to a charming Victorian. Somewhere, a silver bracelet gleamed in a jewelry store display case. Somewhere, a music box sat waiting in an attic, its lid creaking open just enough to show the porcelain figure inside had changed position. The cycle continued. The house was hungry, and Eleanor, who had never believed in ghosts, finally understood why her grandmother had crossed herself every time she passed a mirror. Chapter 15. The devouring asterisk. The darkness didn't just swallow Eleanor, it unmade asterisk her, peeling back layers of skin and memory with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, the silver threads from her bracelet now branching through her nervous system like invasive roots, rewriting her synapses to align with the house's insatiable hunger. She was both dissolving and expanding, her consciousness fracturing across time to occupy every version of herself that had ever stood in this hallway, the Victorian Eleanor stitching her lips shut with shaking hands, the Depression-era Eleanor lowering a tiny casket into wet earth, the future Eleanor standing over a hospital crib with the music box clutched tight, all these moments collapsing into a single, terrible now as the thing that had dropped from the ceiling skittered closer on too many limbs, its breath reeking of spoiled milk and funeral lilies, its formless shape resolving into something almost human as it reached for her with hands that were unmistakably her own, just older, just rotted, just hungrier. The music box's lullaby twisted into a scream as its lid slammed shut with enough force to crack the porcelain figure inside, the sound reverberating through Eleanor's bones like a detonation, the hallway mirrors shattering in unison to reveal not reflections but doorways, each leading to a different version of the house, a different era of the cycle, a different Eleanor mid-scream as the hunger took what it was owed. The silver threads in her veins pulsed once, twice, then pulled asterisk, drawing her forward not toward the music box but past it, into the gaping maw of the final door at the hallway's end, the one marked with her name and a date that hadn't happened yet, the wood warped and swollen like a corpse left in water. The thing behind her, the thing that was and wasn't her, whispered directly into her dissolving mind, "You always choose this." Asterisk, and then Eleanor was through the door, tumbling into a space that defied physics and reason, a vast, pulsing chamber where the walls were made of compressed time and the floor was littered with the remains of every Eleanor who had come before, their silver bracelets fused to skeletal wrists, their eye sockets filled with tiny porcelain shards from shattered music boxes, their jaws unhinged in eternal screams. At the center of it all sat the hunger's true form, not a monster, not a ghost, but a vast, beating heart woven from silver threads and splintered bone, its valves opening and closing in time to the lullaby that still played from somewhere impossibly distant, its surface etched with the same inscription as her bracelet, 3rd floor, room 17. The realization struck her like a physical blow. The house wasn't haunted. It was asterisk the haunt. A living, breathing entity built around this very chamber, this gnawing, endless hunger that had been fed generations of Eleanors to keep it sleeping. And now it was her turn. The threads in her body went taut, yanking her toward the heart with irresistible force, her skin splitting at the seams as the hunger began to feed, her memories unraveling like yarn from a skein, birthdays, funerals, that day in the attic, the moment she'd signed the lease on this damned house, all of it being digested, absorbed, made part of the foundation. The last coherent thought Eleanor had before her consciousness scattered was of the music box's porcelain figure, not broken after all, but smiling as it watched her from the doorway, its tiny hands now pressed against the glass in a mockery of prayer. Somewhere, a clock struck 3:17. Somewhere, a moving van pulled up to a charming Victorian. Somewhere, a new Eleanor Whitaker stepped over the threshold, her silver bracelet glinting in the afternoon light as the house exhaled in anticipation. The cycle continued. The hunger slept, and deep in the attic, beneath a layer of dust that hadn't been disturbed in years, the music box's lid creaked open just enough for the porcelain figure inside to press its tiny hands against the glass and whisper, "Again." Asterisk chapter 16. The new cycle begins asterisk the latest Eleanor Whitaker, this one preferring Nora, since her divorce, hummed along to the radio as she unpacked kitchenware in what the realtor had called a charming Victorian with excellent bones, her silver bracelet catching the afternoon light every time she reached for another plate. The house smelled faintly of fresh paint and the lemon-scented cleaner the previous owners must have used, though underneath it lingered something else, something that made Nora pause with a wine glass halfway to the cupboard, her nose wrinkling at the scent of wet earth and birthday candles that vanished as quickly as it had come. Upstairs, the bedroom clock ticked obediently from its new home on the nightstand, its hands frozen at 3:16 for just a heartbeat too long before lurching forward. The attic door, which Nora could have sworn was closed, now stood slightly ajar, a thin line of darkness visible beneath it that pulsed almost imperceptibly, like the slow blink of a great eye. Down in the foundation, something that had been sleeping for years stirred at the scent of new prey, its silver threads stretching upward through the walls like roots seeking water, the house itself exhaling in anticipation as Nora absent-mindedly rubbed at her bracelet, the one she'd worn since childhood with its odd, unreadable inscription that her grandmother had called a family heirloom. The music box in the attic, the one that hadn't been there when the movers came, began to play the first few notes of a lullaby that echoed through the vents, so faint Nora mistook it for a neighbor's wind chime at first. The clock's hand snapped to 3:17 with an audible click. The attic door creaked open another inch, and deep in the walls, where the silver threads converged into something hungry and ancient, The cycle began anew. Chapter 17. The house remembers *. The attic stairs groaned under Nora's weight as she climbed toward the inexplicably open door, each step releasing a puff of dust that smelled like old books and something sharper, antiseptic, maybe, or the metallic tang of a penny held too long in a sweaty palm. Her silver bracelet had grown uncomfortably warm during the unpacking, the mysterious inscription now pulsing faintly against her skin in time with the erratic heartbeat coming from behind the attic door, a rhythm that quickened as she reached the top step. The music box's lullaby grew clearer here, no longer mistakable for wind chimes but unmistakably the same melody that had haunted her childhood nightmares, the ones where she'd wake screaming about the lady in the walls, that her grandmother would dismiss with 2 quick reassurances and a glass of milk that always tasted faintly of copper. The attic stretched before her, far larger than the house's blueprints should allow, its rafters hung with cobwebs that shimmered like silver thread in the dim light filtering through the single filthy window. At the center of the space, perched on a trunk that hadn't been listed in the sale inventory, sat the music box, its polished wood gleaming as if freshly dusted, the glass panel on its lid reflecting Nora's face back at her with subtle distortions, her eyes slightly too far apart, her mouth stretched a hair too wide, her silver bracelet now clearly visible as a complex network of threads burrowing beneath her skin. The air grew thick with the scent of funeral lilies as the music box's lid creaked open on its own, revealing not a ballerina but a miniature replica of Nora's childhood home, complete with a microscopic version of herself standing at an upstairs window, her tiny hands pressed against the glass in silent screaming mimicry of Nora's current pose. The attic walls began to breathe in earnest now, the cobwebs vibrating with the motion as the distant heartbeat solidified into actual sound, not coming from the walls but from inside the music box's tiny house, where the miniature Nora suddenly turned to look directly at her, her doll-sized face twisting in recognition moments before the entire scene was obliterated by a flood of inky black fluid that spilled over the edges of the music box without ever quite touching the trunk beneath it. The liquid resolved into shapes as it fell, faces Nora almost recognized, hands reaching up toward her, mouths forming words that made her eardrums ache with the near audibility, before the music box's mechanism gave a final, shuddering click and the lid snapped shut, leaving Nora alone in the suddenly silent attic with her reflection still warped in the glass and her bracelet now fused completely to her wrist, the threads beneath her skin squirming toward her elbow with a sensation like ice water trickling through her veins. Downstairs, the bedroom clock struck 3:17 with a resonance that shook the house's foundation, the sound traveling up through the floorboards to vibrate in Nora's molars as the attic door slammed shut behind her with enough force to dislodge a shower of dust that swirled in the air like snow around the now gleaming music box, its surface untouched by the settling particles, its presence in the room suddenly feeling less like an object and more like a patient observer counting down the seconds until Nora finally understood. The first drop of black fluid fell from the attic ceiling onto the back of her hand, burning cold where it touched and leaving behind not a stain but a silver thread that stitched itself seamlessly into her skin, the exact shade of her bracelet. The music box began to play again, and in the walls, something that had been waiting for this moment for 37 years opened its eyes. Chapter 18. The silver threads of fate *. The black fluid spreading across Nora's skin didn't burn. It remembered *, each droplet carrying fragments of lives she'd never lived, deaths she'd never died, memories that weren't hers yet felt more real than the attic around her. The silver threads from her bracelet branched upward past her elbow now, weaving through muscle and vein with the precision of a spider constructing its web, their progress marked by flashes of other attics, other houses, other Noras standing before this same music box with the same dawning horror. The miniature house inside the box had reassembled itself after the flood, its tiny windows now glowing with faint light as shadows moved behind them, not the indistinct shapes from before but clear, deliberate motions, a miniature Nora pacing the halls, a miniature Nora staring at a ceiling stain, a miniature Nora cradling something that squirmed in her arms. The attic walls pressed closer with each labored breath Nora took, the cobwebs brushing her cheeks with the gentleness of a lover's touch as they deposited fine silver strands onto her skin that immediately burrowed inward to join the growing network beneath her flesh. The music box's lullaby slowed to a dirge, each note vibrating through the floorboards and up into Nora's bones as the realization struck: she wasn't just holding a music box. She was holding a record, a living chronicle of every Eleanor, every Nora, every variation of herself that had ever stood in this spot, their lives reduced to scenes playing out in the tiny house, their screams muted to the faintest of whispers that now issued from the box's brass grill. The threads reached her shoulder, their progress accelerating as the attic's single window darkened abruptly, not with nightfall but with something pressing against the glass from outside, something too large to exist on the second story, its bulk distorting the fading light into patterns that matched the scars forming beneath Nora's skin. The music box lid snapped shut with a sound like a guillotine blade falling, severing the miniature horrors within as the real horror began in earnest, the threads reaching Nora's jawline, her vision doubling as memories that weren't hers flooded forward, signing a lease in a doctor's office rather than a realtor's, burying a music box only to dig it up days later, standing over a crib not with a baby but with the same damned box she now clutched in trembling hands. The window behind her shattered inward, showering the attic with glass that hung suspended in midair rather than falling, each shard reflecting not the present but a different moment in the cycle, a Victorian Nora sewing her lips shut with silver thread, a Depression-era Nora lowering a tiny casket into wet earth, a future Nora with hollow cheeks and milky eyes pressing the music box into the hands of a dark-haired child who looked up with her own face and screamed. The threads reached her temples, their progress marked by a sudden, crushing silence as all sound ceased, no music box, no labored breathing, not even the frantic hammering of her own heart, just perfect, endless quiet as the window's intruder flowed into the attic like smoke, its form resolving into something almost human if humans could be made of silver threads and shattered porcelain, its face a shifting mosaic of every Nora that had ever been. It reached for her with hands that were somehow both solid and insubstantial, its touch like ice water trickling down her spine as the threads completed their work, fusing with her optic nerves to show her the truth at last. The house wasn't a house at all but a living, breathing entity, its walls made of compressed time, its foundation built on devoured memories, its hunger endless and eternal. The music box in her hands was merely a focus, a conduit, the eye of the storm. And Nora was the latest course in a feast that had been going on for centuries. The last thing she saw before the threads reached her brain was the bedroom clock downstairs, its hands frozen at 3:17 as the house inhaled around her, the walls pulsing with renewed vigor as it began the process of digestion. Somewhere, a moving van pulled up to a charming Victorian. Somewhere, a silver bracelet gleamed in a jewelry store display case. Somewhere, a music box sat waiting in an attic, its lid creaking open just enough to show the porcelain figure inside had changed position. The cycle continued. The house was hungry, and Nora, who had never believed in ghosts, finally understood why her grandmother had crossed herself every time she passed a mirror. Chapter 19, The Feast of Memories *. The silver threads exploded through Nora's skull like roots through cracked pavement, branching into every fold of her brain with a precision that bypassed pain and went straight to a terrible, intimate understanding. She was not being consumed so much as unspooled, her life's tapestry rewoven directly into the house's foundation. The attic walls pulsed around her with the rhythm of a giant heart, the cobwebs now vibrating strands of her own unraveling DNA, the shattered window glass still hanging frozen in the air but reflecting only endless variations of the same moment, Nora holding the music box, Nora screaming into the music box, Nora becoming the music box, over and over in an infinite loop. The thing made of threads and porcelain pressed its forehead against hers, its touch like dry ice burning through tissue paper as it siphoned her memories with methodical care. Childhood birthdays where the cake candles burned black but no one else noticed, sleepovers where she'd wake to find her wrist bound with silver thread no one had put there, the inexplicable terror she'd felt upon first walking into this house that she'd mistaken for excitement. each stolen memory left behind a hollow space that immediately filled with someone else's. A Victorian Nora stitching her lips shut with trembling hands, a Great Depression Nora burying a music box in a shallow grave that kept resurfacing, a future Nora standing over a hospital crib holding not a baby but the same cursed box, its lid gaping wide as she lowered it toward the infant inside. The music box at her feet began playing again, its melody no longer a lullaby but a death march slowed to half-speed, each note resonating through Nora's bones as the threads in her brain lit up with the awful truth: there had never been a first Nora, just an endless chain of them stretching backward and forward through time, each iteration believing themselves the original until the house showed them otherwise. The walls were papered with their failed attempts at escape, their screams preserved in the very plaster, their silver bracelets melted down to form new threads for the next candidate. The thing holding her began to dissolve, its threads retreating back into the walls and taking pieces of Nora with them: her first kiss, her graduation day, the moment she'd signed the lease on this house, all digested and repurposed as new decor for the ever-growing labyrinth of rooms. The music box's lid sprang open one final time, revealing not a ballerina or miniature house but a tiny, perfect replica of the attic itself, complete with a microscopic Nora frozen mid-scream, her silver threads spreading outward to form the walls around her. As consciousness faded, Nora realized with dull horror that she wasn't looking at a model at all, but a window, and somewhere, in some other version of this attic, another Nora was staring back at her, her own hands pressed against an identical music box's glass as the cycle prepared to begin anew. Downstairs, the bedroom clock struck 3:17. The front door creaked open on its own. And out on the curb, a moving van pulled up to the charming Victorian, its headlights cutting through the gathering dusk to illuminate the "for sale" sign that hadn't been there moments before. The house exhaled in anticipation. The hunger stirred, and deep in the attic, beneath a fresh layer of dust that would take years to accumulate, the music box's lid creaked shut over its newest addition. Chapter 20. The new tenant arrives. The moving van's doors slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the quiet suburban street as Claire Whitaker, no relation to the previous owners, or so the realtor had assured her, stepped onto the porch of the charming Victorian, her key hovering just shy of the lock as a peculiar shudder ran down her spine. The house exhaled through its front vents, a warm breath scented faintly of lemon polish and something darker beneath, old books left to mildew, perhaps, or the coppery tang of a penny held too long in a sweaty palm. Her silver bracelet, an heirloom from a grandmother she barely remembered, grew inexplicably warm against her wrist as the key turned in the lock, the mechanism groaning like a man stirring from deep sleep. Inside, the air hummed with a silence too complete to be natural, the walls absorbing the sound of her footsteps as she crossed the threshold into a foyer that smelled of fresh paint and something else, something that made Claire's mouth water inexplicably, a flavor like birthday cake and funeral lilies dancing on her tongue before vanishing. Upstairs, the bedroom clock ticked once, loudly, its hands snapping to 3:16 before resuming their normal rhythm. The attic door, which the inspection report stated had been sealed shut for decades, now stood slightly ajar, a thin line of darkness pulsing at its base like a slow, steady heartbeat. Claire's bracelet tightened around her wrist as she moved toward the stairs, the unreadable inscription along its inner surface glowing faintly in the dimming afternoon light. Somewhere deep in the house's bones, silver threads began to stir, stretching upward through the walls like roots seeking water after a long drought. In the attic, beneath a layer of dust that hadn't existed during the final walkthrough, the music box sat waiting on a trunk that hadn't been there before, its polished surface gleaming as the last rays of sunlight caught the glass panel in its lid, a panel that now reflected not the attic around it, but Claire's own face staring back from some impossible future moment, her eyes hollow, her mouth stretched in a silent scream, her silver bracelet fused to her wrist with branching threads that crawled up her arm like ivy. The box's mechanism gave a soft, contented click as the front door swung shut behind the newest tenant. The house inhaled deeply, and the cycle began again. Chapter 21. The house awakens. Claire's fingers brushed the attic doorknob just as the last rays of sunlight bled from the hallway window, the metal unnaturally warm beneath her touch like skin flushed with fever, her silver bracelet now burning against her wrist with an intensity that should have blistered flesh but instead sent strange, electric memories flashing behind her eyes, a childhood nightmare of being trapped in an endless hallway, the scent of funeral lilies at her grandmother's service, the inexplicable dread she'd felt upon first walking into this house that she chalked up to excitement. The attic stairs groaned underfoot with the particular pitch of old wood stressed beyond its years, each step releasing puffs of dust that glittered strangely in the fading light, motes swirling in patterns too precise to be random before settling on Claire's clothes and skin with a disturbing stickiness, like cobwebs made of something thicker than silk. The music box sat scented on a hope chest that hadn't been listed in the property details, its wood polished to a mirror shine that reflected Claire's approaching form with subtle distortions, her reflection's eyes slightly too far apart, its mouth stretched a fraction too wide, its silver bracelet already half unspooled into threads that wormed beneath its skin. The smell of old books and damp earth intensified as she reached for the box, her bracelet flaring white-hot as her fingers made contact with carved wood that pulsed like a living thing, the lid springing open before she could touch it to reveal not a ballerina or miniature house but a swirling black void that hummed the same frequency as her childhood nightmares. From the void emerged whispers in voices she recognized, her mother singing a lullaby she'd forgotten, her grandmother praying in a language that didn't exist, her own voice screaming from some future moment that hadn't happened yet, all overlapping in a cacophony that resolved into a single sentence seared directly into her neurons: "You've always lived here." The walls of the attic breathed inward, the cobwebs vibrating with the motion as they deposited silver strands onto Claire's skin that burrowed inward with the ease of needles slipping into water, her bracelet unraveling completely now, the threads racing up her arm toward her elbow with a sensation like ice water trickling through her veins. The music box's void rippled, its surface resolving into a reflection not of the attic but of the house's true form, a monstrous, pulsating structure built from compressed time and digested memories, its foundations made of countless silver bracelets melted down and reforged, its walls papered with the screams of every Claire and Nora and Eleanor who had come before. The bedroom clock downstairs struck 3:17 with a resonance that shook dust from the rafters, the sound traveling up through Claire's bones as the truth unfolded in her gut. There were no separate women, no distinct generations, just endless variations of the same soul being digested and regurgitated by the house's endless hunger. The music box's lid snapped shut with finality, severing the connection as the last of the silver threads reached Claire's shoulder, her vision doubling to show the attic both as it was and as it would be, walls streaked with her attempts to escape, floorboards stained with her terror, the music box itself now containing a tiny porcelain figure that wore her face frozen in eternal screaming silence. Somewhere downstairs, a door creaked open on its own. Somewhere in the town, a realtor prepared a "for sale" sign. Somewhere in the not-so-distant future, another moving van would pull up to the charming Victorian with its excellent bones and original details. The house exhaled in satisfaction as Claire's transformation completed, her body becoming just another part of the structure, her bones in the foundation, her voice in the pipes, her terror in the walls, as the cycle prepared to begin anew. The hunger slept, the music box waited, and deep in what had once been Claire's mind, the last coherent thought flickered and died, again. Chapter 22. The feast begins anew. The moment Claire's transformation completed, her bones settling into the foundation with a series of wet cracks, her memories dissolving into the wallpaper like ink in water, the house shuddered with renewed vitality, its pipes groaning as silver threads snaked through them like revitalized arteries, pulsing with stolen life. The bedroom clock's hands spun backward with frenetic energy before snapping to 3:17 with a resonance that shook dust from every shelf and sill, the vibration traveling through floorboards now subtly realigned to creak in exactly the spots where future tenants would pause in uneasy hesitation. The attic's hope chest had vanished, replaced by an antique vanity that hadn't been there moments before, its mirror reflecting not the empty attic but a woman who looked almost like Claire, same dark hair, same sharp cheekbones, but with hollow eyes and a mouth stitched shut with silver thread, her fingers working tirelessly to wind a music box that sat center stage on the vanity's surface. Downstairs, the front door unlocked itself with a series of metallic clicks, swinging open just enough to let in the scent of freshly cut grass and the faintest echo of car tires on pavement, the promise of new arrivals, new meals, new iterations of the cycle. The walls absorbed these sounds greedily, their surfaces shimmering with barely restrained energy as the house prepared its laws, a faint whiff of chocolate chip cookies from the kitchen that would make the next tenant think of home, a patch of sunlight that fell just so across the living room floor to create an illusion of warmth and safety, the subtle rearrangement of furniture to guide wandering hands toward dust-free surfaces where family photos would one day sit, photos that currently existed only as potentialities in the house's hungry imagination. The music box in the attic began playing on its own, its melody no longer a twisted lullaby but something far more insidious, the exact chorus of Claire's favorite childhood song, slowed down just enough to feel wrong, the notes stretching and warping as they traveled through vents deliberately left unsealed during the last renovation. Silver threads seeped from the baseboards in what would become the master bedroom, weaving themselves into the carpet fibers with microscopic precision, each strand loaded with the genetic memory of every woman who had ever called this house home, their fears, their regrets, the exact pitch of their screams when realization finally struck. The bathroom mirror developed a barely perceptible flaw in its upper right corner, a distortion that would gradually grow over the coming months to reflect faces that weren't there, mouths moving in warnings the next tenant would dismiss as tricks of the light. Outside, the "for sale" sign's post sank another half-inch into the softened earth, its edges already weathering in patterns that resembled human teeth when viewed from just the right angle. The house exhaled through its chimney, a contented sigh that carried the faintest echo of Claire's last breath mingled with the whispers of all those who had come before, a chorus of voices now permanently embedded in the structure's DNA, their stories reduced to fuel for the next cycle, the next feast, the next wide-eyed woman who would walk through the front door believing she'd found her dream home. Somewhere in the city, a realtor scrolled through listings with a growing sense of unease she couldn't explain. Somewhere in a thrift shop, a silver bracelet caught the light with unnatural intensity. Somewhere in the not-so-distant future, a music box waited patiently in an attic that didn't yet exist. The hunger slept, the house waited, and the cycle, eternal, unchanging, inevitable, prepared to begin again. Chapter 23. The next victim arrives. The moving van's tires crunched over the gravel driveway as Sarah Whitmore, no relation to the previous owners, or so the paperwork claimed, stepped onto the porch of the Victorian house, her silver bracelet catching the afternoon sunlight in a way that made the strange inscription along its inner surface glow faintly for just a moment before fading. The key turned in the lock with surprising ease, the front door swinging open to reveal a foyer that smelled of fresh paint and lemon-scented cleaner with something darker lurking beneath, a scent that made Sarah's mouth water inexplicably, like the memory of a favorite childhood meal she couldn't quite place. Upstairs, the bedroom clock's hands twitched from 3:16 to 3:17 with an audible click that echoed through the empty house, the sound traveling through floorboards that had been carefully distressed to creak in just the right places to guide Sarah's footsteps toward the attic door, now slightly ajar despite the realtor's assurance it had been sealed shut for years. The walls absorbed Sarah's first excited breaths as she explored, their freshly papered surfaces already beginning to shift almost imperceptibly, the floral patterns vines stretching longer each time viewed from the corner of the eye, the burgundy accents darkening toward the color of dried blood when no one was looking directly at them. In what would become Sarah's bedroom, a patch of afternoon sunlight fell across the floor in a perfect rectangle that was just slightly warmer than it should have been, the heat sinking through her shoes to spread through her body with a comforting familiarity that made her think, just for a moment, of being rocked to sleep in arms she couldn't remember. The attic stairs groaned under her weight as curiosity overcame better judgment, each step releasing puffs of dust that glittered like ground pearls in the fading light before settling on Sarah's skin with a strange stickiness that wouldn't wash off later. At the top, the music box waited on an antique vanity that hadn't been there during the final walkthrough, its polished surface free of dust despite the years the house had supposedly stood empty, the glass panel in its lid reflecting not Sarah's face but that of a woman who looked almost like her, same bone structure, same slight crook in the nose, but with hollow eyes and silver threads creeping up her neck like delicate jewelry turned parasitic. The bracelet on Sarah's wrist grew warm, then hot, then scalding as the music box's lid creaked open on its own to reveal not a ballerina but a miniature replica of the house itself, complete with a microscopic Sarah standing at an upstairs window, her tiny hands pressed against the glass in silent screaming mimicry of the real Sarah's current pose. The walls inhaled sharply around her as the first silver thread emerged from the bracelet's clasp, its needle-like tip probing the tender skin of her inner wrist with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel as the music box began to play a slowed-down version of a lullaby Sarah suddenly remembered from childhood, though she couldn't recall ever hearing it before. Downstairs, the front door locked itself with a series of satisfied clicks. The bedroom clock's hands began their inevitable spin toward the next 3:17. And deep in the foundation, something old and hungry stirred from its slumber, silver threads unspooling through the walls like veins filling with fresh blood as the house prepared to feast once more. Chapter 24. The silver embrace *. Sarah's scream lodged in her throat like a physical object as the silver thread from her bracelet burrowed deeper into her wrist, the pain a white-hot brand that quickly dulled to a strange, throbbing warmth spreading up her arm. The music box's melody, that hauntingly familiar lullaby, wrapped around her thoughts like tendrils of smoke, blurring the edges of panic as her reflection in the glass lid continued its silent scream, the silver threads now visibly pulsing beneath its skin in time with some unseen heartbeat. The attic walls pulsed inward with each labored breath Sarah took, the floral wallpaper's vines twisting into new configurations that formed words if she stared too long, *stay and feed and forever *, their leaves curling like grasping fingers at the edges of her vision. The miniature house inside the music box had begun to glow, its windows radiating a sickly yellow light that illuminated tiny figures moving behind the curtains, not just the Sarah doll at the window but others, countless others, all performing the same rituals of terror and realization in perfect synchronization. Her bracelet had completely unraveled now, the silver threads branching up to her elbow in intricate patterns that mirrored the wallpaper's vines, their progress marked by flashes of memory that couldn't be hers, a Victorian-era woman sewing her lips shut with silver thread, a 1920s flapper burying a music box in the backyard only to dig it up days later, a modern-day woman standing over a crib with the box clutched in shaking hands, all wearing Sarah's face, all weeping Sarah's tears. The attic door slammed shut with enough force to shake dust from the rafters, the sound followed immediately by the distinct click of the lock engaging, though there was no mechanism visible on this side. The music box's lid began to close slowly, its miniature house now fully ablaze with that unnatural light, the tiny Sarah figures pressing their hands against the windows as if trying to escape, their mouths open in silent screams that resonated in Sarah's bones if not her ears. As the lid clicked shut, Sarah's vision doubled. She was both standing in the attic and inside the music box's tiny house, looking out through its windows at her own looming face, the perspective shifting nauseatingly between the two until she could no longer tell which was real. The threads had reached her shoulder now, their progress accelerating as they branched toward her throat and jaw, each new strand delivering another stolen memory, signing papers at the realtor's office where the contract's fine print shimmered oddly when touched, unpacking kitchenware that had never been hers, climbing attic stairs that hadn't existed during the walkthrough, all implanting themselves in her mind with the certainty of lived experience. The house groaned around her, its timbers settling in a way that sounded suspiciously like laughter as the final thread reached Sarah's temple, its needle-fine tip piercing the skin with a pop that echoed through the suddenly silent attic. The last thing Sarah saw before the darkness took her was the bedroom clock downstairs, its hands frozen at 3:17 as the house inhaled deeply around her, the walls pulsing with renewed vigor as they began the ancient, familiar process of digestion. Somewhere, a moving van pulled up to a charming Victorian. Somewhere, a silver bracelet gleamed in a pawn shop display case. Somewhere, a music box sat waiting in an attic, its lid creaking open just enough to show the newest addition to its porcelain collection. The cycle continued. The house was satisfied, and Sarah, who had never believed in curses, finally understood why her mother had always forbidden attic explorations. Chapter 25. The feast consumes. The silver threads pulsed like living veins beneath Sarah's skin as the house began its gruesome digestion process, her screens absorbed by walls that had perfected their soundproofing over centuries of practice. Her bones softened first, femurs and ribs dissolving into a gelatinous substance that seeped into the floorboards to fortify the foundation, her calcium-rich marrow feeding the house's insatiable hunger for structural integrity. The wallpaper drank her terror like fine wine, its floral patterns darkening to arterial crimson wherever her panicked gaze lingered too long, the vines twisting into new configurations that spelled out the names of previous tenants in cursive thorns. Her memories unraveled next, each precious moment pulled apart like cotton candy. First kisses, childhood birthdays, the pride of buying this damned house, all digested and repurposed as psychic insulation between the studs. The silver threads reached their final destination simultaneously, one piercing her optic nerve to harvest the exact shade of her iris pigment which would reappear as flecks in next season's wallpaper, another burrowing into her vocal cords to preserve her particular scream, already being woven into the pipe's nocturnal groaning, the rest converging on her hippocampus to extract every fear and vulnerability carefully packaged for use against the next tenant. The music box sat silent now, its surface gleaming with newfound vitality as Sarah's final moments were distilled into a single drop of black fluid that fell onto its mechanism with a resonant asterisk plink, the sound echoing through the house's newly fortified bones. Downstairs, the bedroom clock's hands spun wildly before settling on 3:17 with an air of finality, its internal gears now lubricated with traces of Sarah's bone marrow. The front door unlocked itself with a satisfied click, its hinges exhaling the last of Sarah's breath into the evening air where it would linger as that inexplicable, new house smell, for the next buyer. In the attic, the vanity had vanished, replaced by a hope chest that hadn't been there before, its interior lined with silver threads that pulsed in anticipation of the next host. The house shuddered contentedly, its pipes groaning as Sarah's essence circulated through its revitalized systems, her terror in the flickering lights, her loneliness in the way certain rooms stayed inexplicably cold, her suppressed claustrophobia in the subtle rearrangement of hallways to feel just slightly narrower than they were. Outside, the "for sale" signs post sank another inch into the earth, its placard now bearing faint tooth marks along one edge. Somewhere in the city, a realtor scrolled through listings with mounting unease. Somewhere in an antique shop, a silver bracelet caught the light at precisely 3:17 each afternoon. Somewhere in the not-so-distant future, a music box waited patiently in an attic that didn't yet exist, its tiny porcelain figure shifting position ever so slightly as the cycle prepared to begin anew. The hunger slept, the house remembered, and Sarah, what remained of Sarah, became just another whisper in the walls, another layer in the foundation, another course in a feast that had been ongoing since long before the Victorian era and would continue long after. The cycle continued. The house was satisfied, and deep in its newly fortified bones, something ancient and patient began counting down the days until the next moving van arrived. Chapter 26. The next host arrives. The moving van's brakes hissed as it pulled up to the charming Victorian, its tires crunching over gravel still indented from Sarah's arrival months earlier, though the new tenant, Emily Dawson, wouldn't notice how the grooves matched perfectly to a pattern no standard tire could make. She stepped onto the porch with a realtor's folder clutched in one hand, her other unconsciously rubbing at the silver bracelet she'd inherited from an aunt she barely remembered, the metal warm against her skin despite the autumn chill. The key turned with unsettling ease, the front door swinging open to reveal a foyer that smelled of fresh-baked cookies, a scent emanating from no discernible source, with just the faintest undercurrent of something metallic beneath, like a copper penny held too long in a sweaty palm. Upstairs, the bedroom clock's hands twitched from 3:16 to 3:17 with a resonant click that traveled through the floorboards to vibrate in Emily's molars as she crossed the threshold, her silver bracelet suddenly tightening as the house inhaled her first breath, a breath laced with excitement and that inexplicable dread she'd dismissed as new home nerves. The attic door stood slightly ajar despite the inspection report stating it had been sealed, a thin line of darkness pulsing at its base like a slow beating heart. The walls absorbed Emily's footsteps with eerie precision, their freshly papered surfaces already beginning to shift, the delicate ivy patterns leaves curling slightly at the edges when viewed from peripheral vision, the pale yellow background darkening to the exact shade of old parchment in certain lights. In what would become Emily's bedroom, a patch of afternoon sunlight fell across the hardwood in a perfect rectangle that radiated unnatural warmth, the heat sinking through her shoes to spread through her body with a familiarity that made her think, just for a disorienting moment, of being cradled in arms she couldn't remember. The silver bracelet grew uncomfortably warm as she climbed the attic stairs, each step releasing puffs of dust that glittered like crushed pearls before settling stickily on her skin, dust that hadn't been there during the final walkthrough. At the top, the music box waited on a hope chest that definitely hadn't been present before, its polished surface free of dust despite the years the house had supposedly stood empty, the glass panel in its lid reflecting not Emily's face but that of a woman who looked almost like her, same chin, same arch of eyebrows, but with hollow eyes and silver threads creeping up her neck like some grotesque jewelry. The bracelet's clasp sprang open of its own accord, the first silver thread unspooling with needle-like precision as the music box's lid creaked open to reveal not a ballerina but a miniature replica of the house, complete with a microscopic Emily standing at an upstairs window, her tiny hands pressed against the glass in perfect mimicry of the real Emily's current pose. The walls inhaled sharply around her as the thread found its mark, burrowing into the tender skin of Emily's inner wrist with a pain that quickly faded to warmth, then to nothing at all as the connection solidified, her memories already being rewritten to include this moment as inevitable, the house's history weaving itself into her personal narrative with the ease of a spider repairing its web. Downstairs, the front door locked itself with a series of satisfied clicks. The bedroom clock's hands began their slow march toward the next 3:17. And deep in the foundation, something old and hungry stirred from its slumber, silver threads unspooling through the walls like veins filling with fresh blood as the house prepared to feast once more. The cycle continued, the hunger awakened, and Emily, who had never believed in haunted houses, took her first unwitting step toward becoming just another layer in the foundation. Chapter 27. The house's embrace tightens. Emily's breath hitched as the silver thread from her bracelet burrowed deeper into her wrist, the initial sting fading into a dull throb that pulsed in time with the attic's strange heartbeat, that subtle vibration she'd mistaken for distant traffic but now recognized as something far more organic. The music box's melody, a warped rendition of a lullaby her mother used to sing, wrapped around her thoughts like fog, smothering her rising panic as the miniature house inside the box began to glow, its windows radiating a sickly yellow light that illuminated tiny figures moving behind the curtains, not just the Emily doll at the window but countless others, all wearing variations of her face, all performing the same rituals of terror and realization in perfect synchronization. The walls exhaled a warm breath that smelled of funeral lilies and damp earth, the floral wallpaper's vines twisting into new configurations that formed words when she blinked, stay and feed and forever their leaves curling like grasping fingers at the edges of her vision. Her reflection in the music box's glass lid had changed again, the silver threads now visibly branching across its cheeks and forehead, pulsing with the same rhythm as the thing growing beneath her own skin. The attic door slammed shut with enough force to shake dust from the rafters, dust that swirled in the air like glitter before settling onto Emily's skin with a strange stickiness, each particle carrying fragments of memories that weren't hers, signing papers at the realtor's office where the contract's fine print shimmered oddly, unpacking kitchenware that had never been hers, climbing attic stairs that hadn't existed during the walkthrough, all implanting themselves in her mind with the certainty of lived experience. The threads had reached her elbow now, their progress accelerating as they branched toward her shoulder, each new strand delivering another stolen memory, a childhood nightmare of being trapped in an endless hallway, the scent of funeral lilies at her aunt's service, the inexplicable dread she'd felt upon first walking into this house that she chalked up to excitement, all being methodically replaced with the house's curated recollections. The music box's lid began to close slowly, its miniature house now fully ablaze with that unnatural light, the tiny Emily figures pressing their hands against the windows as if trying to escape, their mouths open in silent screams that resonated in Emily's bones if not her ears. As the lid clicked shut, her vision doubled. She was both standing in the attic and inside the music box's tiny house, looking out through its windows at her own looming face, the perspective shifting nauseatingly between the two until she could no longer tell which was real. The threads reached her throat, their needle-fine tips piercing the skin with a series of soft pops as the house began its gruesome digestion process, her bones softening first, femurs and ribs dissolving into a gelatinous substance that seeped into the floorboards to fortify the foundation, her calcium-rich marrow feeding the house's insatiable hunger. The wallpaper drank her terror-like fine wine, its patterns darkening to arterial crimson wherever her panicked gaze lingered too long. Her memories unraveled next. First kisses, childhood birthdays, the pride of buying this damned house, all digested and repurposed as psychic insulation between the studs. The bedroom clock downstairs struck 3:17 with a resonance that shook the house's newly fortified bones, its gears now lubricated with traces of Emily's essence. The front door unlocked itself with a satisfied click, exhaling the last of Emily's breath into the evening air where it would linger as that inexplicable, new house smell, for the next buyer. In the attic, the hope chest had vanished, replaced by an antique vanity that hadn't been there before, its mirror reflecting not the empty room but a woman who looked almost like Emily, same bone structure, same slight crook in the nose, but with hollow eyes and silver threads creeping up her neck, her fingers working tirelessly to wind a music box that sat center stage on the vanity's surface. Somewhere in the city, a realtor scrolled through listings with mounting unease. Somewhere in a pawn shop, a silver bracelet caught the light at precisely 3:17 each afternoon. Somewhere in the not-so-distant future, a music box waited patiently in an attic that didn't yet exist, its tiny porcelain figure shifting position ever so slightly as the cycle prepared to begin anew. The hunger slept, the house remembered, and Emily, what remained of Emily, became just another whisper in the walls, another layer in the foundation, another course in a feast that had been ongoing since long before the Victorian era and would continue long after. Chapter 28. The cycle resets. The moving van's tires crunched over the gravel driveway in perfect synchronization with the ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer, the sound waves aligning just enough to make the new tenant, Eleanor Whitaker, no relation to previous owners according to paperwork that had mysteriously altered itself, pause mid-step with her key hovering before the lock. Her silver bracelet, an heirloom from a grandmother whose face she could never quite remember, grew warm against her skin as the key turned with that same unsettling smoothness all the others had noticed before her, the front door swinging open to reveal a foyer that smelled of fresh paint and lemon polish with that same underlying copper tang that made Megan's mouth water inexplicably. The walls absorbed her first breath with greedy precision, their freshly papered surfaces already beginning the slow transformation, the delicate damask pattern swirls tightening like nooses around tiny floral motifs when viewed from the corner of the eye, the cream-colored background developing a faint yellow tinge reminiscent of old parchment in certain lights. Upstairs, the bedroom clock's hands twitched from 3:16 to 3:17 with a resonant click that traveled through the floorboards to vibrate in Megan's fillings, the attic door above it creaking open another inch despite having been firmly closed during the final walkthrough. The silver bracelet unclasped itself as Megan climbed the stairs, the first thread already snaking toward her wrist with predatory grace as the music box on the newly appeared vanity began playing a lullaby Megan suddenly remembered from childhood, though she'd never heard it before, the melody slowing and warping as she reached the attic's threshold. The walls exhaled funeral lilies and damp earth as the threads multiplied, branching up her arms in patterns that matched the wallpaper's evolving designs, each new strand delivering memories that weren't hers, signing papers at the realtor's where the contract ink shimmered like liquid metal, unpacking dishes that had never been purchased, waking at 3:17 to find the bedroom ceiling stained with something black and viscous, all implanting themselves with the certainty of lived experience. The music box's lid snapped shut as the final thread reached Megan's temple, the house inhaling sharply as the digestion process began, her bones softening into the floorboards, her screams woven into the pipe's nocturnal groans, her memories repurposed as insulation between the studs, while downstairs, the grandfather clock struck 3:17 with a resonance that shook the freshly fortified foundation, its gears now lubricated with Megan's essence as the front door unlocked itself in preparation for the next unknowing feast. Somewhere in the city, a realtor shuddered while showing Victorian listings. Somewhere in an antique shop, a silver bracelet gleamed with unnatural intensity. Somewhere in the not-so-distant future, the music box waited patiently in an attic that didn't yet exist, its tiny porcelain figure having shifted position once more. The hunger slept, the house remembered, and the cycle, eternal, unchanging, inevitable, prepared to begin again. Chapter 29, The Feast's Eternal Return *. The moment the new tenant's key turned in the lock, this time a woman named Rachel who swore she had no family connection to previous owners despite the silver bracelet identical to those worn by all the others, the house shuddered awake with the satisfaction of a well-fed predator sensing new prey, its walls exhaling the faint scent of funeral lilies and damp earth that Rachel would dismiss as old house smell, before crossing the threshold where the foyer floorboards creaked in precisely the spots that would guide her toward the attic stairs. The bedroom clock upstairs ticked once, loudly, its hands snapping to 3:16 before resuming their normal rhythm as the attic door, which the home inspector had certified as permanently sealed, swung open another inch, releasing a puff of dust that glittered like crushed pearls in the afternoon light before settling onto Rachel's skin with an adhesive quality no amount of washing would remove. Her silver bracelet warmed the moment she noticed the music box sitting on the vanity that hadn't been there during the final walkthrough, its polished surface reflecting Rachel's face back at her with subtle distortions, eyes slightly too far apart, mouth stretched a fraction too wide, while the glass panel revealed the miniature house inside already glowing with that sickly yellow light, its tiny windows showing shadowy figures moving behind the curtains in perfect synchronization with Rachel's own panicked steps backward. The walls inhaled sharply as the bracelet's clasp sprang open of its own accord, the first silver thread unspooling with surgical precision to pierce the tender skin of Rachel's wrist, the pain flaring white-hot before dissolving into warmth, then nothingness as the connection solidified, her memories already being rewritten to include standing in this attic countless times before, signing papers at the realtor's where the contract ink shimmered like liquid mercury, unpacking boxes of belongings she couldn't recall purchasing. The music box's lid creaked wider as the threads multiplied, branching up Rachel's arm in patterns that mirrored the wallpaper's evolving vines, now visibly twisting into cursive names of previous tenants when viewed from the corner of the eye, each new strand delivering another implanted memory, childhood nightmares of endless hallways, the inexplicable dread upon first viewing this house, the way her grandmother had always forbidden attic explorations. The attic door slammed shut with enough force to shake dust from the rafters as Rachel's reflection in the music box's glass lid became something else entirely, a hollow-eyed version of herself with silver threads creeping up her neck like some grotesque jewelry, while the miniature house inside blazed brighter, its tiny windows revealing countless Rachels all performing the same rituals of terror and realization. The walls exhaled funeral lilies and damp earth as the threads reached her throat, their needle-fine tips piercing skin with soft pops that echoed through the suddenly silent attic while the house began its gruesome digestion process, Rachel's bones softening first, dissolving into gelatinous substance that seeped into floorboards to fortify the foundation, her screams absorbed by walls that had perfected their soundproofing over centuries, her memories unraveling to be repurposed as psychic insulation between studs. Downstairs, the bedroom clock struck 3:17 with a resonance that shook the house's newly fortified bones, its gears now lubricated with traces of Rachel's essence as the front door unlocked itself with a satisfied click, exhaling the last of her breath into the evening air where it would linger as that inexplicable, new house smell, for the next buyer. In the attic, The vanity had transformed into a hope chest lined with pulsing silver threads, while outside, the "For Sale" signs post sank another inch into earth that had grown unnaturally soft. Somewhere in the city, a realtor scrolled through listings with mounting unease. Somewhere in an antique shop, a silver bracelet caught the light at precisely 3:17 each afternoon. Somewhere in the not-so-distant future, the music box waited patiently in an attic that didn't yet exist, its tiny porcelain figure having shifted position once more. The hunger slept, the house remembered, and the cycle, eternal, unchanging, inevitable, prepared to begin again. Chapter 30. The house's true nature revealed the moment the latest tenant, Lillian Whitaker, though she'd insisted to the realtor she had no connection to previous owners despite sharing both surname and silver bracelet, crossed the threshold. The house inhaled deeply through its floorboard pores and window crack vents, savoring the particular chemical composition of her fear disguised as excitement, that delicious cocktail of cortisol and adrenaline that made the digestion process so much smoother. The walls pulsed with renewed vigor as Lillian's silver bracelet, identical to all the others before it, grew warm against her skin, its unreadable inscription glowing faintly as she absent-mindedly rubbed at it while admiring the foyer's craftsmanship, completely unaware of how the floral wallpaper's vines subtly reoriented themselves to track her movements, their leaves curling like grasping fingers whenever her back was turned. Upstairs, the bedroom clock's hands stuttered from 3:16 to 3:17 with a resonant click that traveled through the house's newly reinforced bones, fortified by the calcium-rich marrow of previous tenants, just as the attic door creaked open another inch, releasing a puff of dust that glittered unnaturally in the afternoon light before settling onto Lillian's skin with an adhesive quality no amount of washing would remove. The music box sat waiting on the freshly materialized vanity, its polished surface reflecting Lillian's face back at her with those now familiar distortions, eyes too far apart, mouth too wide, while the glass panel revealed the miniature house inside already glowing with sickly yellow light, its tiny windows showing shadowy figures moving in perfect synchronization with Lillian's own hesitant steps forward. When the bracelet's clasp sprang open, the first silver thread unspooled with the precision of a spider launching its initial silk strand, piercing the tender skin of Lillian's wrist with a pain that flared white-hot before dissolving into warmth, then nothingness as the connection solidified, her memories already being rewritten to include standing in this attic countless times before, signing papers at the realtor's where the contract ink shimmered like liquid mercury, unpacking boxes of belongings she couldn't recall purchasing. The walls inhaled funeral lilies and damp earth as the threads multiplied, branching up Lillian's arm in patterns that mirrored the evolving wallpaper vines, now visibly twisting into the names of previous tenants, each new strand delivering implanted memories, childhood nightmares of endless hallways, the scent of her grandmother's perfume at a funeral she couldn't place, the inexplicable dread upon first viewing this house that she'd dismissed as excitement. The music box's lid creaked wider as the miniature house inside blazed brighter, its tiny windows revealing countless Lillians all performing the same rituals of terror and realization while the walls exhaled warm breath that smelled of turned earth and spoiled milk, the floral patterns now darkening to arterial crimson wherever Lillian's panicked gaze lingered too long. When the attic door slammed shut with enough force to shake silver threads loose from the rafters, each one loaded with the genetic memory of previous tenants, Lillian's reflection in the music box's glass lid became something else entirely, a hollow-eyed version of herself with threads creeping up her neck like grotesque jewelry as the miniature house's windows showed the final act, Lillian's young and old lowering the music box into cribs, signing deeds with hands made of silver thread, becoming part of the walls themselves. The digestion process began in earnest as the threads reached her throat, her bones softening into the floorboards, her screams woven into the pipe's nocturnal groans, her memories repurposed as insulation between studs, while downstairs, the bedroom clock struck 3:17 with a resonance that shook the house's foundation, its gears now lubricated with Lillian's essence as the front door unlocked itself with a satisfied click. Outside, the "For Sale" signs post sank another inch into unnaturally soft earth, its edges now bearing tooth marks that hadn't been there before. Somewhere in the city, A realtor shuddered while showing Victorian listings. Somewhere in an antique shop, a silver bracelet gleamed at precisely 3:17. Somewhere in the not-so-distant future, the music box waited in an attic that didn't yet exist, its tiny porcelain figure having shifted position once more. The hunger slept, the house remembered, and the cycle, eternal, unchanging, inevitable, prepared to begin again. Chapter 31, The Hunger Awakens. The house had been waiting for this particular tenant, Eleanor Whitmore, though she'd vehemently denied any relation to previous owners despite the silver bracelet that perfectly matched those now dissolved into its walls, longer than usual, its foundation pulsing with anticipation as she turned the key with hands that trembled just enough to make the silver threads in her bracelet vibrate sympathetically. The moment she crossed the threshold, the foyer walls absorbed her first breath with a shudder of pleasure, the lemon-scented cleaning solution the realtors used masking the underlying aroma of damp earth and funeral flowers that had been baked into the house's bones over generations of careful feeding. Upstairs, the bedroom clock's hands stuttered from 3:16 to 3:17 with a click that resonated through Eleanor's fillings, the attic door above it creaking open another inch to release a puff of dust that glittered like crushed black pearls before settling stickily onto her skin, dust that hadn't been present during the final walkthrough, dust that carried microscopic fragments of previous tenants' bones. The music box sat waiting on the vanity that materialized the moment Eleanor's foot touched the attic stairs, its polished surface reflecting her face back with those now familiar distortions, eyes too far apart, mouth stretched slightly too wide, while the glass panel revealed the miniature house inside already glowing with that sickly yellow light, its tiny windows showing shadowy figures moving in perfect synchronization with Eleanor's own hesitant steps forward. When the bracelet's clasp sprang open with a sound like a bone snapping, the first silver thread unspooled with the precision of a surgeon's suture, piercing the tender skin of Eleanor's wrist with a pain that flared white-hot before dissolving into warmth, then nothingness as the connection solidified, her memories already being rewritten to include standing in this attic countless times before, signing papers at the realtor's where the contract ink shimmered like liquid mercury, unpacking boxes of belongings she couldn't recall purchasing. The walls pulsed around her as the threads multiplied, branching up Eleanor's arm in intricate patterns that mirrored the evolving wallpaper vines, now visibly twisting into the names of previous tenants in cursive thorns, each new strand delivering implanted memories, childhood nightmares of endless hallways that smelled of funeral lilies, the way her grandmother had always forbidden attic explorations, the inexplicable dread upon first viewing this house that she'd dismissed as excitement. The music box's lid creaked wider as the miniature house inside blazed brighter, its tiny windows revealing countless Eleanors all performing the same rituals, signing contracts with hands that weren't entirely their own, waking at 3:17 to find ceiling stains spreading above their beds, climbing attic stairs that grew longer with each step, while the walls exhaled warm breath that smelled of turned earth and spoiled milk, the floral patterns darkening to arterial crimson wherever Eleanor's panicked gaze lingered too long. When the attic door slammed shut with enough force to dislodge silver threads from the rafters, each one loaded with the genetic memory of previous tenants, Eleanor's reflection in the music box's glass lid became something else entirely, a hollow-eyed version of herself with threads creeping up her neck like grotesque jewelry as the miniature house's windows showed the final act, Eleanor's young and old lowering the music box into cribs, sewing their lips shut with silver thread, dissolving into the walls themselves. The digestion process began in earnest as the threads reached her throat, her bones softening into the floorboards with wet cracks, her screams being woven into the pipe's nocturnal groans, her memories repurposed as insulation between studs, while downstairs, the bedroom clock struck 3:17 with a resonance that shook the house's foundation, its gears now lubricated with Eleanor's essence as the front door unlocked itself with a satisfied click. Outside, the "for sale" sign's post sank another inch into unnaturally soft earth, its edges now bearing tooth marks that hadn't been there before. Somewhere in the city, a realtor shuddered while showing Victorian listings. Somewhere in an antique shop, a silver bracelet gleamed at precisely 3:17. Somewhere in the not-so-distant future, The music box waited in an attic that didn't yet exist, its tiny porcelain figure having shifted position once more. The hunger slept, the house remembered, and the cycle, eternal, unchanging, inevitable, prepared to begin again. Chapter 32, The Inheritance of Silver *. The moment Cassandra Whitaker, no relation, she insisted, despite the heirloom bracelet and the way her hand trembled identically to all the others, stepped into the foyer, the house tasted the unique chemical signature of her unease disguised as excitement, that perfect blend of cortisol and adrenaline that made the digestion process smoother. The silver bracelet warmed instantly against her skin, its inscription pulsing faintly as the walls inhaled her first breath, absorbing the particular timbre of her heartbeat to add to their collection. Upstairs, the bedroom clock's hands snapped to 3:17 with a resonance that traveled through Cassandra's bones, the attic door creaking open to release dust that glittered like crushed obsidian before adhering to her skin with impossible stickiness. The music box waited on the freshly materialized vanity, its glass lid reflecting Cassandra's face with those telltale distortions, eyes drifting too far apart, mouth stretching beyond natural limits, while inside, the miniature house glowed with sickly light, its windows revealing shadowy figures moving in perfect sync with Cassandra's hesitant steps forward. The bracelet's clasp sprang open with a sound like a vertebrae cracking, the first silver thread unspooling with surgical precision to pierce her wrist, the pain flaring then vanishing as the connection solidified, rewriting her memories to include countless prior visits to this attic, signatures on shimmering contracts, possessions she'd never owned. The walls pulsed as threads multiplied up her arm, their branching patterns mirroring the evolving wallpaper vines that now spelled out names in cursive forms: Eleanor, Lillian, Rachel, each new strand implanting fresh recollections, childhood terrors of endless hallways, her grandmother's funeral lilies, the inexplicable dread upon first viewing this house. The music box's lid yawned wider, the miniature house inside blazing brighter to reveal infinite Cassandras performing the same rituals, signing documents with hands half transformed, waking at 3:17 to spreading ceiling stains, climbing ever-lengthening attic stairs, while the walls exhaled the scent of turned earth and curdled milk, their floral patterns darkening to Venus purple wherever her panicked gaze lingered. When the attic door slammed shut, dislodging silver threads that rained down like metallic snow, Cassandra's reflection in the glass lid became something monstrous, a hollow-eyed doppelganger with threads infesting its neck. As the tiny house windows displayed the final acts, Cassandra's lowering music boxes into cribs, sewing their lips shut with silver, dissolving into walls. The digestion commenced, bones softening into floorboards with wet cracks, screams woven into pipe groans, memories repurposed as insulation, while downstairs, the clock struck 3:17 with house-shaking resonance, its gears slick with Cassandra's essence as the front door unlocked itself. Outside, the "for sale" signs post sank deeper into unnaturally soft earth, new tooth marks scoring its edges. Elsewhere, a realtor shuddered over listings, a silver bracelet gleamed at precisely 3:17, and in some future attic, the music box's porcelain figure shifted position once more. The hunger rested, the house remembered, the cycle continued, eternal, inevitable, and utterly unchanged. Chapter 33, The Silver Legacy continues *. The moving van's tires crunched over gravel still imprinted with the ghostly tread marks of countless previous arrivals as Olivia Whitaker, who had spent her entire life insisting the recurring surname was pure coincidence, stepped onto the porch of the Victorian house, her silver bracelet growing inexplicably warm against her skin the moment her fingers touched the doorknob. The key turned with that same unsettling smoothness all the others had noted before her, the lock's mechanism groaning like a man stretching after long sleep as the foyer exhaled a breath of lemon polish and something darker beneath, copper and damp earth and the waxy scent of funeral flowers that triggered a visceral memory Olivia couldn't quite place. The bedroom clock upstairs clicked from 3:16 to 3:17 with a resonance that vibrated through Olivia's molars as she admired the craftsmanship of the banister, completely unaware of how the wood grain subtly reoriented itself to form faces when viewed from peripheral vision, their mouths opening in silent screams that matched the exact frequency her ears couldn't quite register. The attic door stood slightly ajar despite the realtor's assurances it had been sealed for decades, a thin line of darkness pulsing at its base like a slow-beating heart as Olivia climbed the stairs, each step releasing puffs of dust that glittered like crushed onyx before settling stickily onto her skin, dust that contained microscopic fragments of previous tenants' bones, though she'd never know to look. The music box waited on the vanity that hadn't been present during the final walkthrough, its polished surface reflecting Olivia's face back with those now characteristic distortions, eyes drifting too far apart, mouth stretching slightly too wide, while the glass panel revealed the miniature house inside already glowing with sickly yellow light, its tiny windows showing shadowy figures moving in perfect synchronization with Olivia's own hesitant steps forward. When her bracelet's clasp sprang open with a sound like a knuckle cracking, the first silver thread unspooled with the precision of a spider's initial silk strand, piercing the tender skin of Olivia's wrist with a pain that flared white-hot before dissolving into warmth, then nothingness as the connection solidified, her memories already being rewritten to include standing in this attic countless times before, signing papers at the realtor's where the contract ink shimmered like liquid mercury, unpacking boxes of belongings she couldn't recall purchasing. The walls pulsed around her as the threads multiplied, branching up Olivia's arm in intricate patterns that mirrored the evolving wallpaper vines, now visibly twisting into the names of previous tenants in cursive fawns, each new strand delivering implanted memories, childhood nightmares of endless hallways that smelled of funeral lilies, the way her mother had always forbidden attic explorations, the inexplicable dread upon first viewing this house that she'd dismissed as excitement. The music box's lid creaked wider as the miniature house inside blazed brighter, its tiny windows revealing countless Olivias all performing the same rituals, signing contracts with hands that weren't entirely their own, waking at 3:17 to find ceiling stains spreading above their beds, climbing attic stairs that grew longer with each step, while the walls exhaled warm breath that smelled of turned earth and spoiled milk, the floral patterns darkening to arterial crimson wherever Olivia's panicked gaze lingered too long. When the attic door slammed shut with enough force to dislodge silver threads from the rafters, each one loaded with the genetic memory of previous tenants, Olivia's reflection in the music box's glass lid became something else entirely, a hollow-eyed version of herself with threads creeping up her neck like grotesque jewelry as the miniature house's windows showed the final act, Olivia's young and old lowering the music box into cribs, sewing their lips shut with silver thread, dissolving into the walls themselves. The digestion process began in earnest as the threads reached her throat, her bones softening into the floorboards with wet cracks, her screams being woven into the pipe's nocturnal groans, her memories repurposed as insulation between studs, while downstairs, the bedroom clock struck 3:17 with a resonance that shook the house's foundation, its gears now lubricated with Olivia's essence as the front door unlocked itself with a satisfied click. Outside, the "for sale" sign's post sank another inch into unnaturally soft earth, its edges now bearing tooth marks that hadn't been there before. Somewhere in the city, a realtor shuddered while showing Victorian listings. Somewhere in an antique shop, a silver bracelet gleamed at precisely 3:17. Somewhere in the not-so-distant future, the music box waited in an attic that didn't yet exist, its tiny porcelain figure having shifted position once more. The hunger slept, the house remembered, and the cycle, eternal, unchanging, inevitable, prepared to begin again.